and action. Hey everyone, it's DrRic. Eli had a question on cross-country improvement. I assume cross-country training or how to improve on cross-country technique. So just as a disclosure, I'm not a distance runner. I have done 2 marathons. I actually just did them in Chicago because I wanted to see if a yoga practitioner can finish a marathon without any training, and I did. I also had iliotibial band syndrome. I hit the wall at 13 miles both times, but I learned to walk a lot, and that's how I began my hiking career. If this is the first time you're finding me though, before I get into this, please hit the subscribe button down below and the alert button to find out when I do more videos. So Eli, the ideas about cross-country. Obviously you should get a good coach to teach you about the small techniques that will get you to be a better runner. I think that my idea as a sports medicine specialist is to not see in the clinic for damage, knee pain, knee patellofemoral syndrome. They're the same things. Usually that's the #1 reason we get people into the clinic, whether it's running, work, activities, exercise. Knee pain is very ubiquitous because of the way the knee is designed. But regardless, I do have a video on knee pain, and I'll put a link down below. We have to be careful with that, have to be careful with shin splints, have to be careful with foot pain, problems with the foot. So that's why technique is very important. If you don't have a coach, then you should get one to evaluate your form, give you ideas on cadence, maybe improve the way you run. So those are very important techniques. Sometimes if your parents will allow it, or if you are injured, your specialist will get you to a physical therapist to see what your running style is. Again, when you're injured, it's going to be hard to evaluate your gait on a treadmill, but that's usually the best way. Actually, the best way is to see how you do on grass in a competitive situation, but why would you be going to a physical therapist if you're not injured, right? Well, that's pre-conditioning. And if your insurance is good and your specialist is good, you might be able to pick out something that you might be deficient on and fix it. So, 2 of the biggest things, I am a sprinter. And with sprinting, we have short distances, 100, 200, maybe 400 if I have to fill in for somebody. Now that's way back in school times. But some of the same strategies still exist. Whenever I used to take a curve in a 400, if I had to do a 400, I usually did 2s and 1s. There's 2 curves in a 400. There's 1 curve in a 200. So believe it or not, with sprinters you have a lane that's about a yard, a little more than a yard in width. And if you're doing a curve, you would think the shortest distance between the blocks and the finish line is a straight line, and that doesn't make sense. But in a curve, if you would hug the inside of the curve, you'll actually have 1 less step if your opponents are taking the outside of the curve. So it's important to know how to attack a curve, going on the inside when you can. I always say coming off of a curve. I also race cars. Coming off of a curve, you have a lot of momentum, and that's the best time to accelerate or control your acceleration. It's called a power slide. When you throw the back end out of your car, it's nice because you can drifting is I think what most of the young guys know, but there's a way to just take the momentum and accelerate with it. So I believe that with cross country, if you're going to overtake anybody, now those are the challenges and those are the variables with the track or the conditions of your run, hills and curves. So you can take advantage of overtaking somebody coming down from a hill. You can take advantage of overtaking somebody coming off of a curve. That's when you have the least amount of effort, and usually other people are tired. So you take advantage of other people's weaknesses. So you train for that stuff. Again, that's more with a running coach, so please listen. If you don't have a good running coach, there's a lot of YouTube videos. You might be able to find some nice pointers here and there. Cadence is also important. Footwear is also important. So I'll leave those technical things to your coach. I'd also say weight is important. So as you're starting to grow and sprout testosterone, your hormones are allowing bones to lengthen. Sometimes what happens is when bones lengthen, if you don't do any active stretching or don't have a yoga practice, your muscles will be tight, and that does limit stride length. It also sets you up for problems with injury. So it's important to have a stretching routine. My daughter's high school, the running coach said they don't have to stretch because in a study, it didn't seem to help. But I'm thinking, who is this guy? It always helps to do a stretching exercise before and sometimes a cool down after. So there's something called the TREP effect, that when you stretch out muscle, it actually warms up, and I guess it can turn on more of these actin-myosin bonds. So you technically have a bigger force you can generate. So I think it's important to stretch. And it also, if you think about stride, if you're flexible and you can get into a longer stride because your hamstrings are longer and your glutes are longer, you can throw your foot a little bit farther out before it plants. You'll be able to get, if you have strength with that, more strides per second. I believe the cadence that everybody shoots for is like 3, in marathon running, it's 3 steps with every second or something like that, 180 rule, I forget what it is. But so it's important to work on flexibility. And sometimes your body weight, you might find a sweet spot that varies by like 5 pounds. But if you go too light, I mean, the more you weigh, the heavier your carriage when you run, and that's at a disadvantage. Like me carrying a backpack of 80 pounds when I go training, fine. If I'm taking a mountain or a bunch of people up a mountain, I'm not going to carry 80 pounds. I'm going to carry the essentials with fluids, first aid kit, cameras. So I keep it low. And if you're heavier than you're supposed to be, you're going to be straining more and using up more energy and getting fatigued faster. So you can't go too light, because at that point in time you're also robbing, you could be robbing muscle protein, and that might screw up your efficiency of training. So there's a sweet spot as regards to weight. I usually go by BMI, but sometimes with running there's a lower than average American BMI you strive for. Just look at all the runners. If you look at most of the Kenyans or the elite runners in marathon, they're skinny as rails, but it's funny, when I take care of the first aid tents, I used to volunteer at first aid tents for the Chicago Marathon. The beginning of the marathon, if you're at a tent, you don't even hear the Kenyans go by. They're so light, they're efficient, you don't hear them breathing heavy. And then the elites go by after them, and you can see them putting a little bit more power. And then you have this huge pack of crazy people that comes in the body of the marathon with costumes and beers, and so that's always fun to see, but usually they'll turn their chips in at about 13 miles. However, again, weight, you have to find your sweet spot. And that also leads me to talk about the other portions of maximizing on your healing time is training. Again, with the training interval that you get designed for you, some people have said the more you train, the more you run, the better runner you will be. And I think it still takes techniques, whether it's pacing, intervals, attacking hills, tempo. There's different ways to train for a marathon, more so than just aggressively attacking mileage. When I was running, it's just you put your mileage in and you become a better runner, but that only gets you better if you have the natural talents. If you still have a little bit of ways to go to develop and you don't get these special techniques, and the science is beautiful nowadays. Exercise physiologists will be able to tell you how to maximize on things. Well, I'm getting at the point of rest, fluids, and fuel. Rest is important, especially as you're growing. You always want to make sure you get about, at the minimum, 8 hours of sleep. I know some people said they can get by, especially college students. Oh, I can get by with 4 hours. Yeah, right. You can get by with 4 hours, but you're going to hurt something. Your brain needs rest time, rejuvenation time. Your adrenals need rejuvenation time, and your muscles need rejuvenation time. So don't rob your sleep because you can do it. Try to maximize on your sleep, and you'll have better recovery. If you have faster recovery, better recovery, you can get to train more aggressively, and that also depends on the building blocks that you eat. So I like whole food, mostly plant-based diet. It kind of depends on how your parents cook, depends on what's available in the school cafeteria, depends on how you prep your food on Sunday to eat for the next 5 days. So it is important to try to stay away from processed foods. I went to Pita Barbecue the other day because I like their falafel. So I'm essentially, at this point in time, I'm vegetarian, and I can still get muscle. So everybody always asks where you get the protein from. There's a lot of protein in vegetables, a lot of protein in plant-based food, but bottom line is I ate the falafel, but I asked the guy behind to show me what he uses to deep fry. And he showed me these huge generic vats of soybean oil. And soybean oil in the United States is paid for, subsidized by the government, but it also is GMO, genetically modified. And that just turned me off. So it is important to eat properly. The more processed food you have, the more pesticides you take in, the more genetically modified foods you eat, the more fast food you eat, the less the building blocks for recovery. And so the better you eat, the better the building blocks, the better the recovery, the faster the times. So be mindful of what you're eating, and you might have to help out in the kitchen, or on Sundays when your parents are busy, you might want to take a trip or say, hey, let's go to the grocery, let me pick out my stuff for the week. It makes it a lot easier for everybody. Just bringing your money and buying cafeteria food. Most of the cafeterias I've seen in the United States as far as hospitals and high schools are terrible, believe it or not. Colleges, they're getting better, but be in control of what you put down as your fuel sources. Hydration is also very important. I know you can get by, most of us can get by. I usually will force myself not to drink too much fluid to see how far I can push hiking conditions. Doing a hike of 10 miles up an incline and carrying water is always good to hydrate, as long as you don't have to pee all the time, and as long as you don't have muscle cramps. If you get muscle cramps, you hydrate more. If you have to pee all the time, you're going to cut down on your time to summit. So it's important, and then you have to find places to do that stuff. But anyway, hydration is very important. Sometimes if you go into a race dehydrated, you're going to cramp up and have performance issues. The other thing is also supplementation is important. Average American diet usually is not okay. Average American diet standard American diet is terrible. We're lacking so many things. In Chicago, vitamin D for sure. Most of my vegetarians, B12 and iron deficient. A lot of my athletes, magnesium deficient. A lot of my stressed out kids, magnesium deficient. So there's a lot of things, depending on how you eat, that you might have to be taking in. I like using, for my adults, turmeric, sometimes glucosamine sulfate, magnesium. But as a young person is growing up, if I don't know you, at the least a multivitamin. I mean, I don't like multivitamins, but I find if you get used to taking a multivitamin every day in high school, and it's got some basic building blocks. I just don't like combining all those things together because you need binders to do that in the pill. But at least it'll get you trained so that when you get into college and young adulthood, you'll be used to taking supplements. And yes, I do think everybody needs supplementation. I think it makes you better with providing building blocks you might not be getting in your diet. And I will find deficiencies on everybody. So you come to me, we test you. Again, as a high schooler, I don't have to draw your blood to do that. I'll just assume, based on your diet, if you give me a diet diary, what might be missing. Finally, after you get all that stuff, after you have good fertile soil for putting roots down, then you have to figure out what you're going to do with cross-training. I think cross-training is very important. You don't have to be a bodybuilder, because the more muscle mass you have, the heavier you get. Again, the heavier you carry, the more force you have to generate and resistance. But you want to have muscle tone. You want to have muscle to be efficient with its extraction of blood. You want to be able to tolerate lactic acid. So I mentioned a couple of things as far as tempo runs, far legs, interval training, running hills, but sometimes cross training is important. Resistance training is definitely important. It'll help as you do the fast runs, or as you overtake somebody, your finishes. If you're a marathoner, again, running a competitive pace is important, but if all you do are easy runs 5 to 7 days a week, and you don't really put in pace runs, you're not going to really be able to push the muscle to its maximum tolerability. So it's important, again, to cross-train the right way without injury. It's important to have proprioceptive exercises. It's important to have isometric, eccentric, concentric. It's important to know which weaknesses you have. In sprinting, you always want to do leg presses, explosive exercises, but also you want to be able to force upper extremity. Sometimes in a 400 or longer, if you and your competitor are both matched up leg for leg, stride for stride in power, then the guy with the upper body strength, without getting too bulky, will usually be able to pull it on at the end if he's well fed. So those are important things that a personal trainer or exercise physiologist or a physical therapist should be able to design for you. Finally, the last bullet point would be calm. So the stress response will get you the jitters to do the massive lift that you're trying to do, or finish the race, overtake going down a hill, overtake on a curve. But sometimes those same forces, called the stress response, when adrenaline and norepinephrine's turned on, they also get you a false start if you're in a track. Or they'll also make you, as soon as you hear the gun, take off and burn all your energy up, and you'll lose your pace because you'll get burned up. You'll have high lactic acid. You don't want to burn yourself out. So sometimes practicing calm will also help during those times when stress response has to be controlled. It's good to have stress response. When I'm doing a max lift nowadays, I'll always turn on Metallica, get juiced up, get my guided imagery in place, and see myself lifting the max lift. It's important, but at the same time, those are all turned on by having a good calming practice. I usually have a meditative practice I get every morning. This morning, about 15 minutes just looking out over a lake in my backyard, and that's all I did. And as soon as I finished, I had all these great ideas. In fact, I started sending some messages to other folks thinking that they'd get their messages later. One guy was up at like 4:30, and I apologized, but I had a great idea. So either way, I think calming practice is so underutilized. So this is the same thing I suggest for anybody with any diseases. Whether you're doing high school cross country or whether you're taking care of a heart attack, I think having nutrition is very important. Having a calming practice is very important. Moving as best as you can within the tolerances of your disease process, very important. Sleep, very important. So I think all these things also translate over to having the best responsiveness from your muscles if they're growing. By all means, coaching is important. If you don't have a coach as far as running or nutrition or a pain or a problem, a difficult area, then you can certainly send it to me. I'll see if I can send or respond depending on what you're sending me. Or I can maybe send you to other people that would benefit you most. So good question, Eli. Hopefully this gets you a little bit of an idea, but definitely get those coaches involved. And if you have any other further comments or questions, put them down below. Otherwise, I appreciate everybody watching, and share this with some other runner or young person that's trying to make his way into college level. And hopefully we can get other conversations started in the future.